This may be the most expansive set of multitracks I have received. Thank you, Michael Jackson fan from the cloud, for sending these my way. Earth Song, we have so many things. Even things you can't hear or are not present in the final mix, including an extension of the lead vocal track at the beginning that goes all the way through the end of the song, but it's not what we hear on the song, Earth Song, that we have come to know and love. Detailed choir, orchestra, ad-libs. You've never heard it like this. Look at all this. And I really think that the ending of this song is one of the most epic endings recorded ever. The emotion that Michael Jackson gets into, I've never heard anything like it since. Start with some guitar.
What about sunrise? What about rain? What about all the things that you said we were to gain? What about killing feels? Is there a time? What about all the things that you said was yours and mine? Did you ever stop to notice all the blood we've shed before? Did you ever stop this notice, this crying earth, this weeping shore? Ooh.
There's this weepy, mourning quality to his voice, which, when you watch the music video to this song, or you understand the state of mind that he was in, or we think he was in, when he wrote this, what is wrong with the world? We're destroying it. You feel that in his vocal performance there, especially in isolation. And you hear this.
Look, we make sure
you hear Michael Jackson's body become a percussive entity in the lead vocal track.
This crying earth, this weeping shore.
I have it on good authority that they'd have a mic down by his feet and out in the room as well as right next to him so they could capture some of the body movement percussion that he would do while he recorded his lead vocal. There's a double here.
Make sure
we totally hear that in the final mix. Synth voices. This is Michael with some synth. Then Now those cut in and out, in the eventual mix, they would have automated those out before there was no material there. But because nothing is mixed here, we're getting a much more raw representation of these. That's why you just hear them cutting out instead of swelling in and out or fading in and out with automation. Just soars. Swelling of the horns. Ooh. All right, we'll go more there in a little while. I want to explore some of these acoustic guitars. Listen to the tone on these things. Some electric. Soul, blues, classic rock, church choirs, the melding of all the genres in one of the most accessible ways ever. Okay, now here's where things get really interesting. We've got this track here, which has all of the lead vocal up to that point. And then we have this part here that is not what we hear on the mixed recording. We actually hear this one. But I'm going to play this other one first because it's awesome.
Ooh,
And we really get a sense for Michael, his coordination, his mixed voice coordination here, which he brings in a different way later. That's not a head voice. That's a witchy, whiny. It's that sort of supported mix up there that by itself, you got to use it to taste, and he does. But this is one reason. I mean, yes, he had a high voice, and he had trained his voice to have a wonderful range through the use of mixed voice. This is extra transparent right here in terms of the bass technique to get there. And we can hear, still very nasal, still very placed high, but we can hear him grounding in his normal chest voice there. This is the kind of stuff that when you're listening to a master do it, you're like, oh, of course, that's just his voice and he's amazing and he's doing something that's a little odd. But it's these kinds of sounds that we can learn from as vocalists, put coordinations in our own voice that are initially very new and something we may resist leaning into. But if you do, you can uncover all sorts of things in your own singing. And that's really what this channel is all about. If you'd like more help working with your own voice and finding out what it can really do, click the link below in the pinned comment or video description and join my free singing course. I'll help you experiment with your voice non-judgmentally so you can pull all sorts of things out of it. Okay, ready? Here we go.
Hey, what about yesterday? What about not life? What about evening? What about my time? What about living mean?
What about? There's that. It's a connected, slightly thicker than head voice. Not what about? Or what about? But what about? He's got some body to it, even though it's nowhere near the intensity with the grit and the pulled chest that we hear in the final mix.
What about my time?
But beautiful at the same time.
What about living mean? How can it sleep? What about heaven mean? What about the deal? What about heaven mean? It can't even see.
This section here is obviously what is on the final mix, and then it switches to this other one. Could be that he sang it all the way through. They use the first part, let him sort of just be a guide for maybe something else that was being recorded in the studio at the time.
What about
The
heaven
lyrics aren't
mean?
even there, right?
What about the deal? What about heaven mean? I can't even see. What about all the games with no place to sleep? What about everything? I can't even say.
It's cool.
What about heaven mean? What about the deal? What about Camille? What about Camille? What about Evelyn? He can't even see.
And this is one of those things you can't really know where they were in the process, but I know that in sessions that I've been in, lots of times the lyrics, when they're doing all the music and laying things down, the lyrics aren't fully written. And the vocalist has to experience what the music becomes in order to finalize the lyrics.
He can't even see. What about all the keys? What about the dream? What about ever meet? What about the deal?
I like listening to that raw vocal so much because we hear that raw, carefree, mixed posture that we hear him lean into more all over his career. But we hear it in a way that was like, it was never meant to be heard by the masses. And so it's this gateway sound or gateway coordination that we can lean into as a vocalist or just appreciate it. And then I also like it because it's incomplete, right? Like I was saying before, not all the words are there, but the energy is still cool and still there. Now, here's what is actually on the recording, or the final mix, in isolation. It's joined with this other track here, initially.
I used to dream. I used to glance beyond the stars.
This one is...
Now I don't know where we are. Although I know we're drifting far.
I think there's a crossfade sort of thing that happens there in the mix. Because we got...
I'm going drifting far.
Okay. Then... Mute, switch.
What about yesterday?
Okay, before we get into this, because I'm not going to be able to stop once I start this, just the development is, and his vocal delivery and passion is unparalleled. But listen to this gateway sound that we had from earlier, this sort of floppy, and then listen to how he leans into it more here. You hear his voice break up just a little bit, and it's still loose, right? It's not, I got to be really on pitch. I got to be really controlled. There's an abandonment. And then he carries that posture into the intensity for the back half of this song. That's the key. There's this, there's this looseness to it, and then he lets you have it, but he comes at it from that standpoint. Yeah, he's rhythmic. Yeah, he's intense, but there's a relaxed intensity that's allowing him to get things out of his voice that if he was just like this, which is how you sort of picture him once he really gets into it. No, it's a relaxed, abandoned thing.
What about yesterday? What about the season? Heavens are falling down. I can't even be. What about ever again? I ain't even do. What about us? What about nature's worth? Is our planet smooth? What about us? What about animals? What about it? Turn kingdom to dust. What about us? What about elephants? What about us? Have we lost their trust? What about us? What about crying whales? What about us? Ravaging the seas? What about us? What about forest trails? Red is what I believe. What about us? What about the Holy Land? What about it? Torn apart by greed? What about us? What about the common man? What about us? Can we set him free? What about us? What about children dying? What about us? Can you get them cry? What about us? Where did we go wrong? Someone tell me why. What about us? What about baby boy? What about it? What about the days? What about us? What about all the joy? What about us? What about the May? What about us? What about the crying man? What about us? What about Abraham? What about us? What about Dave again? Do we give a damn? Woo! Woo!
Okay, now I want to go back and listen to just a few key things here. And then I want to bring the orchestra in here because this is truly special to hear the orchestra with this church setting here, you know, this call and answer with the choir. And It is absolutely nuts. Okay, ready?
What about nature's worth?
You hear him doing this grounding into the depths of his soul, right? He's calling out, and then there's this that happens, and it happens frequently. You don't notice it as much with the choir in.
Turn kingdom to dust. What about elephants? Have we lost their trust? What about crying whales ravaging the seas? What about forest trails? Burn this might I please.
What about forest trails? This connection that he has to the whole body of his voice, even in that abandonment up there, the range of frequencies and engagements that we feel with every line, it's so special.
Burn this might I please. What about the Holy Land?
Land! I cannot get over it. And this is the kind of stuff that you don't get to hear in the final mix. And you don't even get to hear it that much because the choir covers those exits up somewhat.
Burn this might I please. What about the Holy Land? Torn apart by greed.
You'd never hear most of them. Okay, now this orchestra, Take Me to Church. Yeah.
What about everything? What about us? I ain't even do. What about us? What about nature's worth? Is up in this world. What about animals?
Do you hear the syncopation in the choir in conjunction with the way the horns were working? The choir was sort of calling or sort of responding to what the horns did. Right, you have that tripolit thing happening in the What About Us, and you have the consistent duple sound coming from the horns. That contrast, masterful arranging. French horns in. So in a former life, I was a recording engineer for the Aspen Music Festival, and I got to mic up orchestras all the time. And it's fascinating to spot mic an instrument and hear the qualities of it being close mic'd. You know, you hear the bleed from the rest of the, because they're all in the same room, but you hear this definition. But then you hear the overhead mics or the room mics that are capturing how the orchestra is self-mixing. As each instrumentalist is listening to what's around them, they're utilizing dynamics. You don't get that from the spot mics. The spot mics are there when we want to bring out the definition of a particular line. But listen to these spot mics and listen to how well the orchestra mixes itself just with a couple mics in the room. No spot mics. then we can add definition. Typically what happens in these settings is the brass is turned down and the string spot mics are brought up, and you get a bit more body out of those strings because those horns just, they're so bright, they're so present. All right, let's back it up. Listen to some church service here. It's those kind of rhythmic things that I just never really internalized before having access to these tracks. Listen to how the orchestra steps down and leaves this sort of rhythmic hole, but then how Michael's vocals carry us. How the horns interact with Michael's hollers here, his woofs, just... Giving some love to the masterfully played piano. Yeah. Now when these drums kick in, piano, it's a percussion instrument, primarily a percussion instrument, and you can hear it melding with the drummer. That pocket is important. You hear how the piano is actually slightly behind in the groove with the drums. This is really important. You have to have a pocket between two percussive instruments that lets the music sort of breathe. Not everything's right on the grid or right on the beat. But if certain instruments, particularly ones with sustain, are ahead of the really percussive instruments, then stuff sounds uneasy. Look, you can even see it here in the waveforms. Do you see the attack of the drums comes slightly before the attack of the piano? The piano is laying back into the beat. Look here, you can see it consistently. There's another hit, another drum hit, more drum hits, And the attack of the piano is behind it. This goes for the bass too. The bass has to lean back into the pocket provided by the drums. Yeah. I love the octave pedal on the bass too. The bass fills are priceless. Rooting. Letting that drummer be steady, letting him carry the essence of the groove. And then these other guys they're being aggressive, but they're laying back into the beat, as you saw with that piano. This is what creates pocket. This is what real musicians playing together and creating something that cannot be explained, really. I'm sort of explaining it, but it really is felt. You know, when we have Michael really dragging that beat like a soul singer, and then but he's also aggressive, right? And then we have these bass fills coming in and out. We have that happening with the drums. It's the tension between all of these things that are felt and performed as individuals coming together and creating a joint tension. And we love that tension. You just don't get that with programmed music. And with, AI models and groove knobs and loops. So this is why we get shivers when we listen to this. That's why I get shivers when we listen to this. Real interactivity. I can talk about that more, but this is interesting too. Listen to the drum verb. I'm going to put the drums in now. Turn the drums down. You hear this delay, almost a slap delay, when the drum verb is too high in relationship to the already affected drums. But if we bring these drum verbs down and listen, it works. That drum verb attack is on the backside of the drum beat. And if it's too prominent, it sounds sort of flammy and weird, all in the mixing and arranging. If this was directly on the transients of the drums, in other words, we didn't have that sort of pre-delay happening, it wouldn't feel right. It would feel muddy. The attacks of the drums would feel muddier. So it's actually beneficial for us to have this drum reverb in the proper proportions, slightly delayed. We want a little pre-delay so that we can get a drier transient. This helps in the mixing process. You really feel the vibrancy of the transient sounds. They're not caked in reverb at the very, very beginning. There's a couple milliseconds where it's fairly dry. You hear this on vocals too. Granted, in Michael's case, Here, we don't hear any reverb on it. That's partially what's so fun. We get to hear it completely in the raw. Thank you so much for exploring this with me. What an incredible song. An incredible needed message every day to take care of this incredible gift, our world, our earth. And Michael's passion at the end, this genuine, vulnerable passion that came out in his voice as a result of a lifetime of living with his voice and understanding it and not understanding it. But at the end of the day, it's expression, genuine, vulnerable expression that we heard here. You can have the best musicians in the world. You could have people sitting there programming all the sounds, but you're not going to get this kind of connection. Again, if learning how to connect with your voice interests you, and you'd like to learn how to sing for real, without all the pressure and without all the judgment, click that link below in the pinned comment or video description and join my free singing course. And here is a growing playlist of other Michael Jackson multi-track and live analysis videos that I've done here on the channel.